It's a Japanese RPG. How hard can it be? You've beaten Contra. You can take this game on. I just have to get a couple more levels. How does it keep critting on me? Guess I need to grind more. How the hell can I plan for that? How long will this drag on? Another 3 hours
When will this pain end?
Left? Okay. Just nightmares. You've had them before. You've had them before over and over again ever since... What's that sound? Okay, it's the middle of the day. I shouldn't be too surprised. Probably some road construction crew or... You know, it sounds like it's coming from the house. Downstairs?
I have got to stop falling asleep while doing reviews. Okay, what was I working on? That game. That game.
Some games leave their mark on you. Whether it be through brilliant writing that makes you ponder your existence and what it means to live, or it's the joy of a shared experience as you band together in the camaraderie of battle. These games live on through the ages, defining the medium and drawing more people to the beauty of video games. But not all experiences are positive. Sometimes a game is just bad. Sometimes a game just doesn't work for the type of player you are. Or a game just hits you at the wrong time and the wrong place. And sometimes a game becomes your kryptonite. It ends up leaving you seizing on the floor, struggling to breathe as the darkness engulfs your broken and shattered state. For me, that was Stranger of Sword City, a game that frustrated me at every turn. While its latest port came out on the PC on June 6, 2016, it's been out in the gaming world on the PlayStation Vita and Xbox One for a couple of months now. Costing $39.99, it's a game that, let's just say, would have stopped many normal reviewers from completing it if they went through the same experience that I did. What do I mean? Well, I'm just going to show you this. That's right. To finish this review, to make sure I hit the end of the story, I played the game for over 170 hours. I suffered through some of the worst gameplay situations that I've ever gotten myself into. You may think I'm absolutely nuts for spending this much time on one review. And you're absolutely right. But when I take a review code and promise to do a review to my fans, I intend to keep that promise. It posed me this question: what is the ultimate test of a reviewer? The answer is simple: to step back and objectively look at what you played, analyze the experience you went through, and determine if the game is right for certain gamers out there. And that's what I'm going to do with this Japanese dungeon crawling RPG that dragged me through the pits of Hades. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher, NIS America, for the purposes of review. Yes, that's right, folks. I subjected myself to this. I asked for this. Now, that won't change my opinion of the game in the end. I mean, you'll find that out soon enough. But why tell you that? Because of transparency and FTC guidelines. As well as the whole morals thing, you know? Let's kick off from the beginning of the madness. The game appropriately starts you off in a plane heading towards Alaska. There's some strong symbolism early on from the developers' Experience Incorporated, as the icy tundras represent the cold and harsh difficulty that you'll face gameplay-wise. Now, that plane doesn't exactly make it to Anchorage, as while it's over the Pacific Ocean, it mysteriously vanishes from the sky. Not because of some rogue country taking it down, no. It just so happened to go through an interdimensional wormhole and crash into the world of Iscario. Our mysterious hero Nyx wakes up in a mystical underground dungeon. Nyx is the lone survivor of the plane crash, unfortunately. But don't worry for those who were lost. Nyx will enjoy the state of death soon enough. As Nyx stumbles around the dungeon, he'll run into a mysterious old man. He's there to give you necessary exposition and warn you that you probably need to get out of that dungeon, the whole evil creatures trying to kill you thing. Including him. Yeah, not 5 minutes into the game, and you get betrayed. Once again, the developers do a wonderful job of setting the tone of the game from the get-go. I really should have taken the hint early on. But luckily, a mysterious woman swoops in to save the day, and you finally get some action in combat. Which goes as well as you should expect for a human who's wandered into a bunch of monsters for the first time. Nyx died. Granted, the woman, named Ryu, ends up finishing the fight handedly. After reviving Nyx, she ends up telling you the story of the strangers, people who wandered from the Earth into this realm. Like you, they were pulled here by a mysterious force, unable to get back, and they've been fighting to find a way home. But in the meantime, they find themselves to be strong warriors, as they've had to fight for their lives in order to survive. Now you're probably saying to yourself, wait, how are they strong warriors if they were just normal in their original world? To the game's credit, it does try to explain this. Basically, the gravity in Iscario is a lot more forgiving, and you're stronger because of it. Now, does that explain the ability to cast magic or even use a sword effectively? No, of course not. But details schmeetails, we've got more game to play. Before you can get out of the area, however, to continue your conversation with Ryu, you get ambushed by a lineage type, which are basically the boss monsters of this world. They are central to the plot due to them carrying blood crystals, and they are a force to be reckoned with. We've got a few battles under our belt at this point, so naturally, it's time to take what we've learned so far, use it to the best of our abilities to take the boss down. Nyx is dead. Yep, dead again. I mean, Ryu is 12 levels higher than him at this point, but for someone who's apparently supposed to be one of the saviors of this world, he really sucks at this to begin with. After Ryu does all the heavy lifting, you find that despite getting your ass handed to you, you're apparently a chosen one. Because if anything makes me feel like a chosen one, it's getting my ass handed to me twice in a 15-minute time period. Suffice to say, the game doesn't do a good job of establishing your importance early on in terms of gameplay. Now, Nyx's strength, as I'll reveal later on in this review, isn't necessarily his ability to fight. However, if you're establishing a character as being central to the success of your mission early on, then there are times where you want an easy battle or a scripted battle to establish that plot point. Stranger of Sword City did not do this, and thus, I never really felt Nyx's impact on the story. Anyway, this is where you join the Strangers Guild, which has all the strangers that have crossed into this world. You meet a couple of central characters, such as Kyo, and you settle in to determine what your role will be. Killing those lineage types. Yes, the same lineage type that made you feel like a mouse in a den of lions. By killing those lineage types, you get blood crystals, and like I said before, that's the main driving force behind the central plot of the game. There are 3 characters known as vessels within Stranger of Sword City, who act as proxies for different gods in the world. There's Ryu, who we've already met, who serves Obelisk, the dragon god of neutrality. Her goal is simple: get the strangers back home. Then there's Merilith, the leader of the kingdom, and a priestess to Phoenix, the god of light. She is kind and welcoming, but also demands a natural order to things. Basically, you can see what she wants you to see in her light, and going outside that light will not get you on her good side. And then there's Alm, a young leader who serves the god of darkness, Oma. He fights for the people of the slums, and despite his body being weak and needing help breathing, he's also willing to help anyone who's in need. He's cunning, but of the 3 vessels, he may be the one who's the most grounded in this situation. These vessels are basically in competition for the blood crystals that you gather, and they will grant you the blessings of their particular god when you give it to them. By doing so, they become more powerful themselves, and eventually, you'll have to side with one of the 3 of them and their end mission. This leads to 3 possible endings, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But this is where the story shows a lot of promise. The agenda and the secrets that are behind each of the factions set up a lot of interesting subplots that cross-connect with the various subquests of the game. Each of these vessels of the gods have some hidden secrets, secrets that have multiple layers of complex human themes to them. While the subjects themselves are complex, its execution in the early and mid-game is pretty darn interesting, especially the portions about the substance known as pony powder. Is our addiction to drugs that keep us safe from short-term health harms really good for us in the long run? Is it a necessary evil? Those questions did make me think and ponder, and I admit I wanted to see where the game went with them, even through my struggles. But sadly, that falls apart at a certain point, the last third of the game. The game's writing suddenly shifts abruptly and becomes rather by the numbers for the genre at that point. There's still the promise of an interesting ending, of course, but the interesting elements that the game introduced early on now take a backseat to the main plot and Nyx, who I've already revealed to be an uninteresting element in this story. The game really should have kept with focusing on the world and less about Nyx's interactions at that point, because unfortunately, it really suffered because of it. But let's get back to why you probably considered playing the game in the first place, the gameplay. So after more tutorials, exposition, and a lot of words, the game finally gives you control, allowing you to create your party and venture off to collect those blood crystals. This is a dungeon crawling JRPG, but it's got some twists on the formula that makes it stand out in a bunch of ways. But just like wearing Crocs makes you stand out, that's not necessarily a good thing. So, if you've ever played a typical turn-based RPG, you should know the deal here. You tell your characters to smack an enemy. They smack you. Rinse and repeat until one side is dead. There's nothing atypical about the base in which Stranger of Sword City works off of. And hell, it seems like turn-based RPGs are a bit more rare nowadays, so it was nice to get back to that base gameplay. Your team consists of 6 characters, and you're able to design every single one of them from the get-go. Each of your heroes start as a specialized class, such as the protection and healing-based priest, to the speedy samurai who focuses on swift strikes of sophisticated swordsmanship. There's 8 classes in all, and 5 of the classes are critically important to any success in the game. Now, not to say that the ninja, fighter, and samurai classes don't have strengths, but the remaining 5 have unique skills to them that can't be compared. For example, the dancer's ability to use multiple items in a turn is absolutely necessary in places where you can't use magic. Or the necessity of enchanting all of your current weapons with a holy attribute from the priest will be necessary in those dungeons of the undead. So after forming your crew of misfits, you go back to the first dungeon that you encountered. The game basically works as a typical hunting experience. You're trying to find those lineage types within the dungeon walls, and you'll have to look high and low for them, whether they be hidden in ambush spots or in new parts of the dungeon you haven't explored. With the basics of the RPG genre in the back of my head, a solid collection of heroes with different powers, and no plot armor to get through, Nyx and his crew finally got to the first boss. Okay, I finally can let my hair down, get to the core of the fighting, and use my natural skills to finally get son of a bitch! Welcome to Stranger of Sword City, a game more difficult than having a rational conversation within the YouTube comments section. Harder than traveling back in time and convincing someone 15 years ago that the two main 2016 presidential candidates are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. At this point, I restarted my journey, hoping that the information that I learned up to this point would help me make better decisions the next time around. After restarting and getting back to this point, I died again on my first attempt on my own. This is where I knew that I was in for a long struggle with this game. Which on the surface isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some of the best games are known for their grueling difficulty. However, there's a couple of factors that can help distinguish a game from being rewarding difficult to aging you into an early grave difficult. And the problem with Stranger of Sword City is that a lot of those mechanics end up putting it in the second category, where each decision that you make feels like the right one, only to have it completely wipe you off the face of the earth. Nothing you do is enough. Nothing. How in the hell can I... Okay, calm down. This game got to you, but don't let it get into the review. You're professional. You're not gonna let it sink in. Okay, back to it. Look, let's start with an example. Let's start with one of the most basic mechanics of the game, the permadeath mechanic. Now this isn't your basic permadeath mechanic here, because when a character dies, it isn't the end for that hero. Each character in this universe takes after a good old Italian plumber, as they have a set of lives. When they are killed in battle, they lose a life point. However, if you take them back to the guild and let them recover over time, they will gain that life back. Okay, so you'll never lose a character with this mechanic, right? Only if you're really careful. While you have 6 characters in a party at any time, if a character is recovering, they will be unavailable for around 7 in-game days. And considering the difficulty of common enemies in this game, the 12 to 14 characters in total may not be enough, especially if you need a particular class at any one point in a particular dungeon. Which you will. You end up having this cycle, and considering the possible differences in levels, you may find it harder to bring in new characters in the fold at that point. Now this means you've got to do your best to manage your crew and keep them alive, and this will cause you to make hard decisions. Some older members of your party that may have more stats will have less life points to spare, but as I'll reveal later on, it's just another mechanic to frustrate you time-wise, and that's a theme that the game settles in very early on. If you need a specific hero, you end up just wasting time, trying to get him through recovery and back into your crew. With all the other mechanics in the game, it ends up feeling unnecessary, even if it's a unique take on the permadeath mechanic. Now there's one exception to this rule, our hero Nyx. Remember how he's a chosen one? Well, he's an even more special chosen one. Basically, unlike the other heroes, he's turned on the infinite lives cheat. No matter how many times he dies, he'll come back. He's doomed. doomed to an endless cycle of pain, of suffering, of death, of failure, failure, failure. It's just a game. It's just a game you spent 170 hours on. Get it together. Finish this, finish this. Let's get back to the review. In terms of gameplay, there's one place that this RPG element shines in, and that's the strategy element in battle. Not only do basic enemies give you a challenge, but I'm more referring to the actual lineage type boss fights. That's because the game will force you to change up your strategy in order to deal with certain bosses and adapt to the circumstances around you. It forces you to use your entire arsenal to take them down, identifying how the battle is going and using those very specific situational skills at the right time. You can't just chop your way through this game. You have to think about every move. For example, some bosses focus on canceling your buffs, forcing you to defend against their specific disable magic. Some bosses will focus on hard hits that will take you out in one hit, but can be debuffed rather easily with certain moves. And some will bring loads of backup, and it's up to you to use multi-enemy hitting moves to even the playing field before they get loads of backup. And I have to emphasize paying attention to the battle when using your skills, especially with the divinities. The divinities in-game are turn-based magic spells that use morale that have huge effects on battle. For example, being able to regain 10% of your HP during one turn for the remainder of the battle. And they can really turn the tide of battle if you use them correctly and identify the situations they are good in. For example, if one of your characters is about to die, and you're afraid that the enemy is going to hit them before you can cast a recovery spell on them, then it may be time to use a divinity that guarantees all your characters to go first. It's that kind of strategy that really made Stranger of Sword City fun at times, like in a constant chess battle. So that would seemingly carry the game, except for the fact that it doesn't at all. The problem is simple. It takes way too long to get to that point. For every wonderful battle that the game throws at me, it took an average of approximately 3 hours to get to that battle's iteration. For all the strengths that the game has, you had to deal with repetitive necessary battles and restarts due to out-of-nowhere deaths. It's all thanks to this game's mechanics that extend every single action out way too far. Let's take, for example, the way you get the equipment you need to take on the bosses. Unlike your standard RPG affair, you're not going to find mythical swords lying in boxes in the middle of nowhere, or just seemingly on the ground waiting to be picked up. No, they are guarded by enemies, and you'll have to take the equipment by force, by ambushing them. Spending a little morale in predetermined locations will have you hide in the shadows, watching as enemies carry along treasure chests with weapons, shields, armor, and underwear that can make your party better. And before we go any further, I find it hilarious that monsters are carrying around treasure chests with tighty-whities and guarding them with their lives. You can choose to engage the guards, and you'll have to kill the lead enemy before he escapes in order to take it. Certain areas will have certain types of items, and what you get isn't guaranteed to be an upgrade. It could be a sword designed to take out spirits that you need, or it could be the equivalent of a frickin' butter knife. The higher grade upgrades are significant and can make the difference in those close and difficult battles with lineage types, so you sorta need to do it. Which of course means that you may need to go to an area several times in order to get better equipment. But without any guarantee of any specific equipment to get at any time, that means you'll be doing this a significant bunch, especially if you don't remember where to get a shield, for example. Sometimes those ambush points for those specific spots to get that specific equipment is significantly out of the way as well, so it elongates the process. You know, this sounds familiar. Maybe described by a particular word. Let me see. Immersive gameplay? Not even close. Tedious? Okay, I'm getting a little bit closer. It's on the tip of my tongue. Grinding. Stranger of Sword City? No. You're a citizen to Grind City. Because that's what this game is on every level. I'm not just talking about the loot system. Even in the first area, where you think the game would go a little bit easier on you, you're grinding to gain some levels so that you don't wipe on the first boss. And when you're done and going on to the next selection of levels, get ready to do it all again. Because if there's anything this game is good at, it's repeating itself. And due to the repetitive nature, you're going to be in it for the long haul. You want more evidence that the mechanics support grinding? Look at the class system as well, or specifically, the ability to change class. Now, the way that it works is like this. As you grow your character, they will gain new skills. When you class change, you lose half of your levels that you've gained, and you become another class. However, you don't lose your stats, although you won't gain any new stats until you gain back to the highest level you've gotten on any one class. Now, the reason that class change is simple: to create a more diverse fighter. When you reach level 13 within a class, you get a skill token. For each skill token you have, you can equip one skill that you've learned from another class. So that new warrior that is designed to take a beating, he can cast Ice Bolt if you so desire. That's the strength. And at some parts of the game, you'll need that diverse fighter. There are places where you can't use skills, you can't use spells, but the thing is, you'll need a diverse fighter in order to take care of those areas. Because hey, he's the one you've leveled up. But there's one thing to note within class changing. You may forego skills in that class that may be really useful. The cleric, for example. Sure, I can change the class once he gets the high cure ability. But I also lose the ability to get the full cure if I kept leveling him at that class. So now, it's a question of how long to keep that character within that class. Now, you think that would present a good balanced choice for the player to take on. On one hand, having a diverse crew with skills would be great, considering that if one dies or gets put asleep or silenced, another one would take its place. However, if you want to get the best skills for each class, you've got to keep the character within the class in question. So, when you get the option to first change classes, it's going to be a hard decision, right? As both options have equal value and strengths, at least in what the game presents it to be. Except this game is a goddamn liar. Let me be clear. I wanted to max out my classes before I decided to change. I mean, I figured it was the best option, even if earning levels at lower levels were easier with the experience that you needed. In the long run, it'd be the same, and I'd get to use those great skills for a longer period of time if I got them first. Here's the thing. Remember how I said that the stats don't grow after you re-level? Well, that's mostly true. There's one stat that isn't true for, and that's your HP. And here's the thing. Based on the testing and what I saw, while your HP does seem to drop after you cut your level, it doesn't drop at the same rate that you gain it through leveling. In other words, you gain more HP as you class change. So that means you really need to class change as often as you can, and save getting the final skills for the final classes you end up with at the end of the game. That means you'll be cutting levels constantly, having inconsistent levels within your crew. And you know what that means if you want to get further into the game? Yeah, grinding. Everyone's favorite. I can't emphasize this point enough. Even with games that you have a lot of grinding built into the gameplay, games like Disgaea, I don't even remember a game that was this bad in terms of required grinding. Every mechanic ends up helping that grinding mechanic. If you don't like anything related to grinding, stay far away from this game. And you know what the sad part about this is? It can't even get grinding right. See, In typical RPGs, you'd expect that within a specific area, that the levels of each enemy would be relatively the same. Sure, you may get a level 20 enemy when most of the enemies are level 17, for example. Does Stranger of Sword City follow those conventions? Have you been paying attention to this video? Of course it doesn't. The enemy level variety can be huge. You could be facing level 22 enemies in the last few rounds, but then all of a sudden, a level 41 set of enemies pops up, ones far beyond what you're able to deal with. Now granted, the game gives you a tool to easily deal with this with the divinity mechanic and the ability to run. Again, it's rewarding you for taking a look at the situation and realizing that it's far beyond your reach. Normally, that would be a good thing. But grinding in games is about repeatability and almost turning off your brain. It's a chore, but it can be effective in the right situations. If you want to know what situations, go watch my game design video on how to make grinding work. But that's the thing, it's gotta be easily repeatable, and if it's not, that means the level of engagement is far deeper than it should be. That means the player is engaged, and realizing he's doing the exact same thing over and over and over again. In the process of trying to make the combat more diverse, you made the grinding that much worse. Thus, you have to question why you have so much grinding in the first place. That's what Stranger of Sword City is the most guilty of. Its biggest offense, despite everything that I've said here so far, that it stretches out every single element of gameplay. This should be obvious from the 171 hours that I played, but you really need to understand something. In terms of the actual hours it took to beat the game in terms of the save, it was 60 hours. The thing was, the repeatability, the grinding, plus all the other mechanics, it led to a lot of mistakes. It led to repeat attempts over and over again, and the game kept on making it worse for no good reason in my opinion. Let's take the final level for example. In order for you to unlock the final boss, you have to complete a series of 3 towers, each with its own theme and boss. No skills, no spells, and always poisoned. Each present their own challenge, and can take a bunch of attempts to take down each boss. But even after taking down every single boss, there's a catch. You have to activate 3 switches at the top of each tower to unlock the last portal. In one trip. AKA, you can't travel back home and save. Why? Why do this? The thing is, you don't have to face the hard portions of the tower anymore, aka the boss in those repeat trips. All you have to do is go to the top of the tower and hit the switch, and deal with some enemies along the way. It's pointless. It wastes a good 20 minutes of your time so you can get one attempt at the final boss. And considering that strategy is so important in taking down bosses and the information you gather on each attempt adds up, that may end up adding 2 hours to your overall gameplay for no good reason. Your game was long enough. Why do this to the player? And I only scratched the surface here. Yes, this review will end up being over 40 minutes, but I could talk for hours on hours how many game design flaws this game created for itself with its mechanics. But I want to be clear here. There are some interesting mechanics that Stranger of Sword City introduces. By themselves, they would be effective. They really could work, like with the ambush and loot system. But all of them together end up making this horrible monster of gameplay. And after 171 hours, after all the time that I put it in to see if the ending would finally give some payoff to what was an inconsistent story that had some really nice elements underneath it. So what did I get? A generic ending. It's an ending that basically says, you saved the day, you won, things are great. You want a closure on anything else? Well, fuck you. Even the better endings aren't that good. Sure, there's multiple of them, but after all the work, after all the interesting elements that the game presented throughout the plot, this could only be considered a monumental disaster. all the work, the 171 hours of time that was put in, all for an ending that was a possible 3. All the time, it wasn't worth it. Failed. Stranger of Sword City left me a broken man. The pain and suffering that the game delivered to me was on levels that would be considered a violation of the Geneva Convention. So many mistakes at every turn that led to a miserable experience all around. Sadly, Stranger of Sword City spent too much time grinding off its base score, as it comes in at a 40 out of 100, meaning that it's not worth a buy from an objective level. But if you've watched the channel before, you know that's the only part to the scoring system. I have enhancers, things that are supposed to take into account more subjective parts of the gameplay. But surely there aren't enhancers that would make the game right for you. Right? 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 All games are a trip from one point to another. Whether it be an open world game that you play for 200 hours or a short visual novel that takes you 1, you travel the land and face its hardships along the way. Within a game, there may be 100 different ways to get to a specific point, and some are harder than others, but some are more rewarding than others. The thing is, the journey can have pitfalls, things that can make you fall off the path and force you to climb back up to get to the scalable path. That idea of working through a problem, overcoming adversity, that's something that video games can really take to the next level. It can define a game, it can make a wonderful experience, or a nightmare in certain cases. In the case of Stranger of Sword City, this is the path that most defines what the experience is. Falling off this path is a nightmare to recover from. But here's the thing, if you're able to travel that path, you will be rewarded. The combat in this game does have depth, it does have value. If you're able to play the game in a specific way, using the class change system, knowing what's coming in terms of bosses, then you'll probably have a good time. But only then. That's why these enhancers could make it so that this game that caused me so much pain, could make it worth it for you. That's why I do this. That's why I take the time to find everything about a game that I can. Yes, I hated playing this game after the first 20 hours. I could have made a video doing nothing but blasting the game, getting those sweet clickbait and over-the-top views that YouTube loves so much. But instead, I'd rather find the situation that those individuals out there, those ones who would have loved this combat, who would love this game despite its flaws, that they are able to find this review and find this game. Stranger of Sword City, in my hatred of it, reinforced why I review games. So thank you, Stranger of Sword City. Even though I may be triggered by the word stranger from now on, and even though I never want to look at you again, thank you for putting my values to the test and putting me up to this challenge. Yes, I'm not going to recommend the game to most people out there, but even with that said, I can still see an audience for the Stranger of Sword City. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. And as always, keep on gaming.